At first light, the air holds still, as if it's taking a quiet breath with you. A thin ribbon of smoke lifts from the coals, and somewhere a woven basket gives a soft rattle as hot stones settle inside. Fish gleam under a brush of oil. Camas bulbs rest underground under a damp blanket of seagrass, turning sweet while nobody watches. A wooden ladle dips and lifts a shimmer of water that quivers like a hand mirror. There's no switch to flick, no iron stove singing in the corner, just the steady tick of embers, the patient pulse of heat, and hands that know what to do. Breakfast here is a plan as much as a plate. The first bite always tastes like fire walking its way through wood, into stone, into water, into food, and finally into you. People cooked with what the land gave, and with physics that never changed. The first rule wasn't a list of ingredients, it was a conversation with heat. A fire can bite fast, or it can lay low and last. Your choice decides whether you end up with a charred shell and a raw center, or a tender middle wrapped in gentle browning. Good cooks treat fire like a neighbor, not a servant. That approach saves dinner and eyebrows. A tiny shift in draft can tilt smoke sideways and burn a lesson into memory you don't forget twice. The original kitchen was a circle on the ground, ringed with stones to hold both the shape of the flame and the shape of home. In a longhouse, the fire sat under a smoke hole. Cooking rhythm matched the sky's rhythm as warm air rose. In wind-bitten deserts, low windbreaks nudged the flame and made precious fuel stretch. If you knew how to read one, a hearth told a story. Clean ash meant yesterday's stew and an easy relight. Scattered charcoal said the last cook finished in a hurry. Containers told you what kind of heat you could use, and creativity stepped in where metal didn't exist. A cedar bark basket sealed with pitch, never touched flame, hot stones did the heavy lifting inside. Water hissing, then calming, while the basket stayed unharmed. A hide bag strung from a tripod could hold stew at a boil without scorching, because liquid protects skin the way patience protects a cook. Clay pots fired until they rang when tapped, turned coal beds into steady, well-behaved simmers. If you ever watched stone boiling, it looked like a magic trick until you remembered it was just smart heat transport. River cobbles heated in the fire until they murmured and crackled. Green, wood tongs moved them into water or broth. You'd hear a quick chorus of hiss and sigh, then the rhythm of swapping cooled stones for hot ones kept the pot rolling without a single scorched spot. In that rolling boil, tough meat loosened, acorns mellowed, fish turned sweet. Meanwhile, the basket didn't burn. On cedar-rich coasts where salmon runs stained the calendar, people split boards and made clamping planks. Fish halves were pinned open, set upright, near never over the fire, and the heat walked in from the side like a polite guest. The skin lacquered, the flesh stayed juicy, and the aroma taught children manners without anybody raising a voice. You could spot a plank-cooked salmon from across the beach. Earth ovens were the quiet giants. They required planning and repaid it with tenderness. You dug a pit, lined it with rocks, burned a hard fire until the stones held sun-level heat. A layer of wet greens, seaweed by the coast, fresh grass inland, agave fibers in the desert, made a cushion of steam. Meat wrapped in leaves, roots nestled in baskets. Sometimes a whole layered meal went beneath a cover of earth. Hours later, you opened the ground like a gift that had already written its own thank you note. In the southwest, a Pueblo Horno baked bread and stews with wisdom fired into adobe. You fed the dome a fierce burn, swept the coals, and the chamber held a deep, even warmth perfect for corn loaves and clay pots. Timing mattered. If you misread it, you smiled and called the crust rustic, then tried again tomorrow. Families read the Horno by palm and ear the bright ring when you tapped the wall, the air that rushed your face when you opened the door. In oak woods where the trees stood like patient landlords, acorns were staple wealth, but they asked for a polite conversation with water. Bitter tannins didn't forbid eating, they just demanded care. Shells were cracked with river stones, kernels ground on a meatate until the meal felt soft under the palm. Then clean water was poured again and again through a sand or needle-lined basket, leaching bitterness without washing away nutrition. The porridge that followed held a warm, nutty sweetness, and fed kids and elders with a kindness that felt like policy, not luxury. Corn changed kitchens across the continent, and smart cooks changed corn right back with a simple chemical kindness. Nixtamalization. Wood ash, water, or lime loosened skins and made hominy. That quiet tweak raised nutrition without any speeches. A pot of hominy simmered until each kernel swelled and bloomed. Neighbours who promised they'd only stay a minute drifted toward the smell. And when a spoon could stand in the pot, everyone agreed the meal would carry them through weather and work. Grinding itself was a duet stone and grain, keeping time with shoulders and wrists. A munno rocked over a metate with a soft rasp. Flour fell in calm piles that forgave the effort. Children learned with small hands on their mothers, letting weight do the talking. The sound filled a morning the way light rain fills a roof with comfort. Far north, wild rice grew in lake shallows like slender bells. Harvest wasn't a date on paper. It followed the wind. 2 people in a canoe bent stalks and tapped ripe grains into the hull, making a soft patter like applause. Parching came next, grains stirred in a kettle over coals until husks loosened. Moccasins did the final tread, gentle and precise, separating grain from chaff without bruising. A winnowing breeze cleaned away husks like tidy housekeeping, and you had rice that cooked into clean, curved grains perfect beside smoke-kissed fish. On the plains, where the horizon felt endless and wood was precious, every ember counted. Buffalo meat dried in thin, orderly sheets. Wind did most of the work, smoke did the rest. A pounding stone and a robe turned dried meat and berries into a mix sealed with rendered fat food that travelled well and revived a body with a small bite tucked under the tongue. The flavour sat honest and dense, and it reminded you that fuel had been saved for winter. Along the northwest coast, clam bakes steamed shellfish in sand pits, layered with hot stones and seaweed. The air tasted of brine and sweet kelp. Cedar ladles lifted a broth with a quiet tide note. Shells clicked open like polite doorbells. The first bite was tender yet firm, the handshake you respect. Maple trees, farther inland, offered a different sweetness near the end of winter. On days mild and nights cold, sap rose. People collected it drop by drop, sometimes let ice skim off to concentrate it, sometimes boiled with tight attention. Syrup thickened, sugar hardened into blocks that stored well, and brightened porridge or corn cakes with a cheer that didn't need words. In the desert, agave hearts were slow food in the literal sense. Spined leaves were trimmed away, cores stacked in a stone-lined pit, layered with damp fibres, sealed with earth. A day and a night turned starches to sugar. The cooked hearts pulled into threads with a gentle chew. Smoke and honeyed perfume met halfway in the nose, and anyone still doubting patience walked away convinced. Steam, too, could be the entire method. Line a basket with broadleaves, lay in fish with herbs and a sip of water, cover, and set near coals. Heat speaks through the weave. A soft exhale lifts from the lid. When it's ready, the flesh lifts in clean flakes. Bones step aside without drama. Seasoning came from the land in unfussy forms. Wild onions and ramps brightened stews. Sage and cedar framed meat with fragrance instead of noise. Berries crushed with a wooden pestle, cut fat with tartness. Salt travelled as rock for some, as trade for others. Either way, the rule was coaxing flavour from good ingredients instead of hiding them. Your tongue recognizes honesty the way your ear recognizes a sincere hello. Tools mattered, but they also respected limits. A green wood mast made a spit. A forked branch notched into a support so one person could multitask without apology. A pair of sticks became tongs if you had practice. A fan of bark woke coals without starting a problem you couldn't finish. Obsidian and flint knives bit clean and demanded focus. A slip at the edge of a blade was a story nobody wanted to tell at dinner. Water shaped kitchens as much as wood and stone did. Cold streams chilled fish and rinsed greens. Dry places kept steam trapped under snug lids. A cook could feel the day's pace in the breath of a pot rattle means rein it in. A soft murmur means all is well. Preservation was just cooking with longer sentences. Smoking used gentle heat and fragrant wood to push out moisture and build resilience in sheds where smoke curled in even lines. Drying let air and sun do the heavy lifting. Strips of meat hung thin and straight like careful ledger marks. Fermentation took judgment and trust. Its calendar matched the seasons so winter's logic could feed spring's work. Etiquette lived inside the hearth as firmly as the fire ring. Elders ate first when custom said so. Visitors got a share even when the budget was measured in handfuls. Kids had jobs scaled to their size, tinder gathering, dough rolling, and grew up knowing supper was a team sport. The best cooks fed bodies and the mood of the room in the same motion, a recipe nobody wrote down because everyone already knew it. Across regions, Methods match the land. In the southeast, clay pots simmered corn with beans and squashed quiet nutrition in a reliable triangle. In the Arctic, stone lamps and insulated pots balanced scarce fuel with engineering-level precision. In the Great Basin, seeds were parched and winnowed with a grace that looked simple until you tried it without years in your hands. Hunting and fishing were practical, almost clinical. Meat sliced to even thickness for drying. Fish split and rinsed clean before smoking. Bones and organs were used by preference and season, nothing useful dismissed. Cornbreads wore many names and many shapes, thick under coals. Thin on hot stones, each version tuned to the fuel at hand and the hour available. Roots and tubers arrived with comfort and challenge. Camas bulbs cooked slow until sweetness settled in your chest. Bitter roots got the careful boil and changed water treatment that protected dignity and flavor. Berries came fresh, dried, stewed. A spoon of tart sauce made venison cleaner, and a second helping likely. Fire didn't start by luck. Bow drills and hand drills turned friction into embers that glowed like modest dust until they took a breath and bloomed. Tinder bundles caught the spark. A cook shielded that tiny flame with a focus that ignored chatter. Steel later sped the spark, but the courtesy toward fire didn't change. Mealtime order was a social fabric. Places were understood without speeches. The best compliment was an empty pot that didn't need scraping. Stories followed the last bites, dessert that left no dishes. And behind all of it, quiet, exact, dependable, was the same science you can see today. Heat moving from fuel to stone to water to food, in a chain conducted by attention. Hands knew when to turn, when to lift, when to wait, when to pull the pot early because rain started talking through the roof. Food tasted like people and place because it was built by both. A kitchen without switches wasn't lacking. It was full of choices, each with reasons you could explain without raising your voice. Roast, steam, stone boil, earth bake, wind-dry chase tenderness without waste, flavor without noise, truth without theater. And when night fell and coals beat like small, quiet hearts, the last tasks felt like promises. Ash spread to smother sparks, embers tucked for morning, tools laid where a sleepy hand would find them. "Will we have the same stew tomorrow?" a child asks. "It'll be similar," you say. No two fires ever tell the same story. Morning wakes with the hush of coals nudged together and the whisper of a reed fan coaxing them to glow. The air smells faintly sweet. The memory of last night's sap and the first flicker of flame arrives without theatrics. A pot that slept near the warm edge slides an inch closer. The surface trembles once, as if it remembers the plan from yesterday. A hand rides the lid, decides patience is the correct seasoning, and lets the heat climb at its own sensible pace. Breakfast favors what the land can offer without drama. On the coast, thin cakes of ground fish and roots set against a hot stone until the edges shine. A clean lift tells you the heat is right. Inland, cornmeal turns into a porridge sturdy enough to hold a spoon at a friendly angle, the kind of bowl that lets the day speak its mind. First sips are simple, spruce-tip tea or a bitter bark infusion that clears the fog from behind your eyes. Nothing loud, that's the point. The room moves from silence to conversation as the steam curls and the wood settles. Grinding is the quiet motor of half the pantry. Stones are chosen with the care you'd use naming a child. A metate with a gentle slope feels like a low horizon. The mano fits because the hand shaped it over time as much as the river did. The motion glides front to back with a small roll at the finish. The sound is a soft rasp that keeps time for the household. Flour falls cool, a detail that matters more than it seems, because cool flour drinks water with better manners. Corn carries a chemistry lesson that turned into tradition. Dried kernels soak in water kissed with wood, ash or lime. Hulls loosen and slide free with a shrug. The scent is faintly mineral. The texture shifts from hard to agreeable. That's hominy, a nutritional lift disguised as routine. Pounded and rinsed, it becomes a dough that behaves, forming patties or breads that hold together without demanding attention. The body notices the difference long before anyone could put it in a paragraph. Flat stones become griddles when you understand their mood. You feed a small fire for a long while so the slab warms through no hot patches, no cold corners. Sweep the coals aside, cook on the stone's stored heat. A thin batter of corn or cattail pollen with a bit of ground seed spreads in quick, whispered circles. The rule is simple. Turn once and only once. A wooden blade slides under without scraping, because stones like people don't enjoy being gouged before noon. Where salmon crowd the calendar, smokehouses stand like teachers. Fillets hang with space between so air can travel, and the fire below behaves small, steady, patient. Alder or another local wood sends a fragrance that's invitation, not perfume. Press a finger to the thickest spot. If the dent fills slowly, the fish is ready to travel without turning stubborn. Salt might be a neighbor's gift. Smoke does the heavy lifting. Plank-cooked salmon rests upright near not over flame, cooking from the side with composed distance. Oils baste the flesh as they render. The skin tightens to a lacquer that cracks at first bite with a tiny, perfect sound. Inland pits keep proving that patience pays rent. Hot stones line the hollow. Damp greens turn the sealed ground into a steam chamber that smells like rain with opinions. Roots go in first, they take the longest to learn. Then meat that wants steady heat and moisture. Then leaf-wrapped packages that benefit from the neighborhood but don't need to linger. The earth cap goes on, life continues. When you open it later, flavor explains how unsupervised cooking can be excellent when planning is honest. Clay widens the menu. Coils build walls. Hands and water smooth them. Ground shell or sand tempers the body so it can face fire and later work. First firings are humble and repeated. Introductions before commitment. A cured pot spreads heat evenly and forgives small errors that would humiliate a thin metal pan. A soapstone vessel further north plays the long game. It warms slow, cools slower, and holds a calm simmer even when wind scolds the walls. The cook reads the surface. A halo of tiny bubbles says, "Wait one breath more." A sudden quiet says, "Add water." A shimmer says, "Pull it closer." Seeds deserve respect equal to any roast. People sweep fields with light baskets, tapping and scooping in a rhythm that turns ground into pantry. Parching in shallow trays over coals draws out a nut scent that carries across camp. Pop pop the sound of small victories. Winnowing is a dance with wind. Tilt, lift, fall. Chaff lifts. Clean seed settles. Fine grind for porridges. Coarse grind for texture in stews. It's all the same grammar, just different sentences. Wild rice keeps its dignity in both name and nature. After tapping into a canoe, it's parched and tread, husks separated from grain without injury. Dry roast pulls out a fragrance somewhere between tea and warm wood. Boiled in clear water, each grain curves and stays intact, a polite companion to smoke-touched fish. Leftovers move into soup the next day like they were always meant to be there. Roots each have personalities. Camas asks for long, low heat. Stubborn starch turns into a caramel whisper that settles a winter appetite. Arrowhead tubers sliced and shallow fried in rendered fat go crisp at the edge, tender at the center, and have a way of disappearing first. Other bitter cousins need soaking and water changes that remove what the tongue objects to while keeping what the body appreciates. These are negotiations, not compromises. Stone boiling makes tough cuts civil. Bones surrender marrow into broth that wraps a cold day like a moving blanket. A wooden paddle keeps the motion steady so fibers relax instead of tightening. Fat rises, gets skimmed, and saved for later. Try to rush it and the pot will remind you who's in charge. The finished taste is care, not drama. Small birds roast neatly on green sticks that don't burn. A ring of coals gives even attention. The skin tightens, legs loosen. A gentle twist frees the meat along seams the bird kindly designed. A brush of berry reduction or herb tea lifts flavor without dragging the dish into fashion. Bones become stock. Feathers find work elsewhere. Nothing on the ledger gets ignored. Rendering fat is the quiet craft behind many meals. Dice trimmings sit at the fire's edge where heat is firm but not eager. A wooden spoon moves through now and then. Companionship more than necessity. Clear fat gathers and pours off into a container that minds its own business until called for frying, for sealing travel foods, for taming lean stews. The crispy scraps left behind cracklings turn a plain bowl into a better mood. Salt is precious where scarce, optional where herbs and smoke do the job. When salt is available as rock or traded crystals, it's used like a jeweler handles stones. A pinch makes the difference between good and memorable. Hands learn the line the way farmers learn their soil. Drinks wander beyond water. Spruce tips and pine needles brew a tonic that tastes like green light. Yaupon holly, roasted, becomes a wakeful tea. Roasted corn or parched seed infusions deepen winter cups. A shared ladle at the door straightens road dust from a traveller's shoulders. The welcome is in the warmth. Bark and wood become tools that overachieve. A folded bark tray sits close to heat without sulking. A bark funnel moves water neatly into narrow, necked containers. Cedar boxes hold liquids once you invite hot stones inside to do the heating. The grain swells to seal, an argument closed by good design. Even a simple forked stick that props a spit earns respect by the number of meals it supervises. None of it is makeshift. It's dependable. Far north, meat and fish dry fast in low sun and colder air, then store in darkness away from oxygen's mischief. When fermentation is used, it's governed by experience and temperature rules as firm as law. Portions are measured. The tone is pragmatic. Food safety travels in the same sentence as tradition. In deserts, cooks borrow coolness by smart scheduling. Cook early and late, pound, mix, and dry in shade with breeze. Mesquite pods sift into a flour that tastes like honey talking with earth. Cakes made from it carry a quiet sweetness that doesn't try to lead. Prickly pear pads lose spines to quick flame, then simmer tender. Their gentle tartness makes beans smile. Oak and hickory woods turn acorn processing into a season within a season. Crack, grind, leach, dry. The resulting meal becomes porridge or dumplings that behave politely in broth. Mild flavor is the point. It plays well with others. Children learn to test water by sight and smell. Elders just grin when the pour looks right. Households that master acorns walk through winter with calm shoulders. Kitchen etiquette looks like common sense with a nicer shirt. The person who fetched water from farthest away sits closer to the ladle. The elder with the best stories gets portions that keep the narrative steady but not sleepy. First impressions matter. Visitors often get the piece that flakes cleanest. The cook serves themselves last unless someone insists, and then only with a look that says, "Okay, fine." Hunting and fishing regulations are unwritten but not vague. You don't take more birds than the storm will let you cook. You don't hammer a fish run that's thinning. Nets are mended in off hours and shared when the river argues for teamwork. Those guidelines keep meals on the fire without draining the pantry applied arithmetic with kindness. Fires tell you things if you watch. Pale, thin smoke is a hot, clean burn, quick food. Dark, lazy smoke points to damp fuel and a stew that wants attention, which draws helpers the way a magnet draws filings. A sudden spray of sparks means resin pockets check your sleeves. Even the quiet says something when wind drops and crackle grows comfortable. Trade broadens the pantry. Method stays steady. New foods step in and behave if the technique is sound. If a clay pot can simmer corn, it can simmer other grains. If a pit can soften agave, it can soften any stubborn root. Tools change materials over centuries, clay to iron, bark to copper, but the physics remains loyal. Good cooks keep the center honest while letting the edges learn, and through all of it, the best tools stay the same. Attention and memory. Fire talks in color, sound, and smoke. You answer with air, fuel, and timing. Water announces readiness by the way it clings to a spoon. You decide whether to rain grain in slow or wait. A knife reveals dullness by the way it fails a tomato or the skin on a fish. You sharpen now or later according to what the meal can forgive. None of this needs a clock. It needs a pulse yours, and a room that moves at the speed of heat. By midday, heat should behave like a steady co-worker, not a showboat. The coals wear a thin veil of ash red underneath, grey on top the honest colour of reliable warmth. A low ring of stones holds the edge from cooling too fast. A small gap becomes the door where you feed slivers of wood so gently the flame salutes and goes back to work. Someone on fan duty stirs the draft with wrist, not arm. Too much wind turns lunch into a lesson, and nobody needs that on a busy day. Corn dough slides into thin breads on a pre-warmed slab. You can tell a stone is ready when a drop of water skitters and vanishes without tantrum. The batter spreads in a whisper beneath a quick palm. When the edges lift and freckles appear, a wooden blade moves underneath for the single legal flip. The second side finishes faster than the first because patience has already done most of the heavy lifting. Break one open and it sighs a crisp exhale, and the taste is sunshine convinced to behave. Head southwest and you'll see a miracle that looks like muscle memory. Blue corn batter, smoothed with ash water, thins into translucent sheets on a warm stone. An oiled hand paints, lifts, releases. The sheet peels free in the heartbeat between doubt and apology. It cools with a faint crackle, stacking light as paper, flavored with sweetness riding on a quiet mineral note. Chemistry and kitchen. Close cousins. Beans keep their promise on the edge of heat. A clay pot sits where the surface quivers but never storms. A bit of rendered fat, a pinch of dried herb, and a spoon that listens every so often. When a skin slips between your tongue and teeth without announcing itself, lunch is ready and sensible. A bean done right tastes humble and inevitable. In a longhouse, a single hearth acts like a neighborhood. One pot steams corn, beans, squash the three sisters doing their ongoing teamwork. Another simmers a fish that did not argue at the weir. A third keeps hot water ready for ideas that haven't introduced themselves yet. Smoke goes straight up when weather cooperates. On tricky days, it bends sideways like an uncle with a wandering story. Children carry wood in quiet rotation, part exercise, part logistics class. On California hillsides, bedrock mortars make shallow constellations. Generations of pestles have polished bowls, smooth as river stones. The chorus rises and falls, thump, grind, sift meal catching in woven trays before walking down to a clear stream. Water runs over sand that's hosted this work longer than anyone can recount. Leached acorn meal returns home to become porridge that sits in the bowl like it pays rent. The plains rewrite the idea of a pot when wood is a guest instead of a roommate. A fresh hide, rinsed and set in a ring of stones, becomes a boil bag. Heated rocks shuttle from fire to broth on a steady relay. Meat, roots, and herbs bob as the water rolls. A thin layer of fat renders and helps seal in heat under a lid of green twigs. The flavor lands round and clean, and the only metal might be a bracelet-catching sundae. Berries are the kitchen's Swiss Army knife syrup, sauce, paste, candy, and each form finds its moment. Choke cherries get crushed seed and all. Cooking tames the edge and keeps the nutrition seeds we're saving for themselves. Poured thin, the paste dries into flexible leather. Poured thick with a little fat, it becomes shelf. Stable encouragement that cuts through richness. A spoonful can turn fatigue into let's keep going without being dramatic. Where rivers run cold and clear, fish sometimes never meet direct flame. A leaf-lined basket holds cleaned fish with wild onion and a friendly herb. Set near coals under a tight lid, steam does the work. Flesh pulls from bone like a well-written sentence. The broth collecting beneath is too honest to waste. Quick sip, instant morale. Far north, a carved stone lamp burns oil with a moss wick. A pot rides at a careful height. The flame is trimmed to a narrow, single-colour line when it's correct. The simmer is a necklace of small bubbles discipline that would make an engineer applaud. Fish and game cut small go tender, without ever boiling over into chaos. Add greens late. Keep their colour and their self-respect. Smoking is contract law with time. Thin, even strips hang with space between. Air and smoke walk their routes without bumping shoulders. Hardwood if you've got it. Fruit wood when kindness is on the menu. Resinous wood only when supervised by adults who actually are adults. After a day or three, weather-willing pieces bend without breaking. Surfaces matte like someone politely learned to say no. These are the bites that turn travel into routine. Herbs write footnotes that quietly improve the main text. Sage gives a dry whisper that teaches fat good manners. Wild onion behaves like a helpful cousin. Mint shows up when broth needs to remember morning. Sumac cones steep into a tart drink that answers heat with composure. The colour looks like a sunset that didn't lose its temper. Cedar is for scent beds, not chewing a note handed down, so no one gnaws the furniture. Claymaking is slow design. Coil, slip, smooth, temper with ground shell or sand, then fire in stages you can hear in the pot's voice. Early burns are small and patient. Survive those, and a pot earns a place within arm's reach of the busy seat. By the time the rim is nicked and the base is smoke-kissed, it has a job title. Stone boiling has its preferred cast. Basalt and granite carry heat without drama. Sandstone breaks into opinions you don't want in the stew. Test river stones at the edge for hidden moisture. Greenwood tongs grip, a backup pair waits, because dinner loves redundancy. The dance of swapping hot for cool stones looks effortless only after 1,000 rehearsals. Seed harvest in the basin turns the breeze into a teammate. Beaters that look like fans, baskets that look like answers, timing tuned to the exact day heads release most easily. Parch over coals, press lightly to crack hulls without losing centers, then lift and drop until chaff has the good sense to leave. Run your hand through the clean seed and you'll feel wealth more clearly than any ledger. Marrow teaches broth elegance. Split bones clean, roast ends. Drop into just barely moving water. Skim fat to the side for later. Watch the liquid shift from clear to the color of reason. A pinch of herb and a few slices of root at the end prove that comfort doesn't require theatre. Tools sharpen cooks as much as cooks sharpen tools. A flint edge refreshed with thoughtful strokes glides through fibre without tearing. Spoons carved from wood or horn fit mouths like good sentences fit ears. A ladle finds its balance point on a pot lip, as if it was born for that ledge. When a handle runs too warm, a rawhide wrap solves it, no meeting required. Storage thinks beyond dinner. Parfleche containers stiffened with rawhide and geometry move dry goods through weather and miles. Seams are sealed so well you'd swear the maker argued with rain and won. Clay jars rest half buried where the ground remembers cool. Lids fit with the kind of confidence that deters mice and midnight snackers. Racks hang high where smoke walks and air moves. The pantry, like the cook, is future-minded. Sweetness arrives in practical forms. Syrup blocks from trees shave into bowls and dissolve into spirits faster than mood sour. Mesquite pods roast to flavors like a bakery talked with the desert. Berries need only honesty to shine. Honey is gathered with gratitude and restraint enough for the jar, enough left for the bees. A brush of honey on squash or a drizzle over acorn dumplings feels like a celebration that remembers tomorrow. Protein takes many shapes where the land insists on flexibility. Grasshoppers roasted crisp with a pinch of herb land somewhere between toasted seed and brittle chicken skin. The lesson is simple. Abundance respected beats pride ignored. Nobody calls it a stunt. It's just dinner wearing a smaller jacket. Travel cooking is a pressure cooker without the cooker. Bring a pot to a boil, wrap it in fur and woven padding, let retained heat finish the job while feet cover ground. Carry a basket of hot stones to start the next fire where tinder may be scarce. That kind of planning turns road meals from obstacles into confidence. Water management is a choreography you practice until it looks like instinct. Favor springs. Choose river draws by what's upstream. Dig seep holes beside muddy flows so sediment settles out. Boiling folds into cooking, not a separate errand. Char from clean wood can sweeten taste. Sand and fiber layers act as honest filters for visible trouble. You won't name microbes, but you'll sleep well. Kids climb the ladder of tasks the way dawn climbs a hill. Today, a small hand hovers over a stone and counts the seconds it can stand the heat thermometer. Meet intuition. Tomorrow, that hand flips a flatbread without scorches. Day after, it skims broth without losing a spoonful to excitement. Promotions are paid in trust and more interesting jobs. Feasts scale up methods without changing principles. A cedar box filled with water and ingredients becomes theatre when hot stones parade from fire to broth hiss, sigh, applause. A clam bake pit disappears under mats and sand, then opens to steam and quiet gratitude. A horno line moves loaves like a heartbeat load. Close, ring, tap. Portions are fair. Seconds go to the heaviest lifters. And leftovers are handled with competence that makes waste feel like a stranger. Shared meals don't need posted rules because the rules are older than ink. Guests get pieces that flatter the house. Elders don't have to ask. Children learn how to decline more without closing the door on later. The cook doesn't taste at serving unless asked. The food already gave its opinion in the pot. Flavor balance is the band you call every night. Sour to lift rich, bitter greens to clear a path after porridge. Smoke as seasoning and insurance, sweetness as a grace note until invited to sing lead. Salt steps forward, nods, then steps back. Nothing shouts, everything converses. Tools age like family. A cedar paddle darkens where it has brushed oil and heat. A clay pot develops sheen on the side that always faced the same seat. A metate forms its own valley under a favorite stroke. Repairs are honest and visible. A broken rim becomes a smaller vessel with a new job and the quiet swagger of resilience. In kitchens like these, a fix that holds is a medal. Medicine and menu share borders. Mint, willow bark, juniper. Doses matter, purposes overlap, and elders arbitrate. Cedar or sage smoke clears bugs and sometimes minds. The line between healing and seasoning is walked with care and experience. Seasons keep the beat. Spring rebuilds nets before runs, not after. Summer dries and parches while fire rests. Autumn inspects pit rocks for cracks before the big cook. Winter counts ladders twice, because numbers restore patience when days don't. Work songs match motions. Laughter seasons the room at intervals like spice. Not the main dish, but the reason the main dish tastes like home. And when weather throws a fit, kitchens don't. Heat waves move cooking to morning and night. Lunch turns into fruit, seeds, shade. Cold snaps stretch soups, wake fats, and tuck roasts near coals. Wind spins screens and turns lids into small sculptures with weights. Menus behave like citizens of climate. Cooperative, adaptable, calm. By late afternoon you can measure success without a clock. Coals look right. Pots sound right. The room smells like the middle of a good plan. Someone checks a drying rack. Someone else turns a sheet of blue cornbread with a motion that looks like painting. And a kid tries to steal the first piece the tax children have levied on cooks since the first hot stone. The day, like the fire, is steady. Dinner will be simple, which is another way of saying it will be correct. Evening leans in and asks for methods that reward attention without hurry. Coals get pulled into two useful zones, one that's lively enough to cook, another that's content to keep. You can hear the difference before you see it, the quick tick of active heat on one side, the low hush of holding temperature on the other. A paddle taps a pot like a metronome. Smoke softens from sharp to round. Someone ducks in with a bundle of herbs that mostly survived the walk, and the basket earns quiet praise for speed and restraint. On a stone slab warmed to a patient glow, blue corn batter thins into glassy sheets with a motion that looks more like painting than cooking. Ash water strengthens the batter without swagger. An open palm smooths it so quickly doubt doesn't have time to show up. A corner lifts, the sheet peels free, and it cools with a faint crackle that sounds like paper changing its mind. Stacked under a cloth, the sheets stay crisp enough to sing when tapped and strong enough to travel. Kneading fresh corn into small architectures turns the table into a studio. Kernels pounded while still milky mix with a pinch of meal and a whisper of salt. Dough tucks inside a husk, folds clean, and seals like a well-tailored coat. The packets nestle against warm stones or slip into a shallow pit where heat moves like a tide. Unwrapped later, they smell sweet and green. They pull apart in steam that makes even a tired back sit a little straighter. In woodlands where beans and corn keep their old friendship, dough spirals around seasoned beans and gets tied in leaves that don't fuss under steam. The cut slice shows a tidy spiral planning without drama, and the bowl that holds it looks heavier than it is because confidence adds weight. Stones, like family, need introductions. The slab gets heated, brushed with a thin film of seed or nut oil, rubbed until slick and loyal. The first few sheets are practice. Nobody expects them to be perfect, and the stack grows while someone tells a wind story. Gear earns trust through performance. The kitchen remembers who came through when weather didn't. Near the coast, salmon turns distance into a technique. Sides stand upright on cedar sticks, leaning toward heat instead of over it. A cedar paddle brushes rendered oil in strokes that look casual and are not. The skin lacquers, the flesh firms, a thin white line forms, tracing where raw becomes ready. A tart berry sauce, just enough herb to add focus, keeps richness in tune with appetite. Nearby, a shallow bowl of rendered fish oil warms within arm's length of the hearth. A sliver dipped there comes out glossy, and the same oil feeds a small lamp with a quiet, tidy flame. Food and light sharing a sauce. Efficiency that earns silent applause. Wild rice dresses stews with dignity. Grains parched yesterday and tread clean swell in today's broth, but remain their own people, curved, intact, confident. Folded in late, they keep integrity and give the spoon a pleasant grip. A pinch of maple sugar at the table lets each person choose where to land between savory and a flicker of bright. On the plains, ribs lean near heat, while cooks read the wind like a second recipe. If a gust threatens sparks, a screen pivots. Rack angles adjust so fat renders without finding mischief. Doneness announces itself with that gentle twist and give. Juices run clear. A quick brush of herb tea steadies the flavor. Meat rests, because patience wins more often than not. A pot of corn and squash keeps the conversation moving for people who know waiting is an ingredient. High desert pits turn agave hearts into long, sweet threads. Rocks heat, damp fibers blanket, trimmed cores stack, and earth seals the plan. A day and a night later, the fragrance rises, equal parts smoke and honey, and the hearts pull apart by hand into strands built for slow chewing and longer stories. Beans that simmered all afternoon share the bowl. The pairing lands like a chair that fits. Maple blocks, boiled down earlier in the year, return as practical joy. A warm saucepan softens a corner into a brushable glaze. A swipe across squash or a cake of pounded seed catches firelight and lifts opinion without raising volume. Stored in bark or wood, blocks shave into curls for a winter drink that steadies throats and tempers wind. Camas bulbs, baked to sweetness in covered pits, earn a second life as thickener. A pressed cake crumbles into a pot and coaxes broth to body without muddling flavour. The taste leans toward caramel and earth. A handful of fresh greens at the end keeps the room from getting sleepy. Pine nuts arrive with the gracious weight of good fat and careful labour. Cones roasted until scales splay. A basket toss, a clap of hands half dance, half arithmetic. Some nuts grind to a butter that slides into porridge and upgrades it from duty to pleasure. Others stay whole for a last-minute sprinkle that adds crunch and a warm wood note. A few ride in pouches as insurance against late returns and long stories. Morale is part of nutrition. Everyone knows it even if no one says it. By fast rivers, trout learn the patience of stone. Flat rocks nested at the edge of coals buffer heat and teach evenness. Fish lay skin down. A corner lifts clean, flakes separate without complaint. A squeeze of sour berry resets the tongue between bites. Bones go back to the current with a sincere thank you. Circles close and tempers stay good. Southward, a comel of fired clay hits the skip and vanish water test. And nixtamal dough lands in a rhythm that keeps hands busy and minds free. A single puff tells you timing was right. Under a cloth, the stack stays supple. The smell roasted corn with a whisper of ash is the definition of enough. Beans with epazote, or a local herb, stand by to prove that contrast outperforms complication. Tamale-style packets travel everywhere with accents that match the map. Treated corn dough wraps fillings the season authorizes. Husks or broad leaves tie the deal. Steam does the work. The unwrap reveals a tidy parcel that holds shape, releases scent, and makes waiting look clever. Sharing them is generosity scaled up. Portable, divisible, fair. Barbacoa and cousins use pits lined with hot stones and leaves that lend moisture while taming size. The cover goes on, and time joins the crew cooking while people fetch water, grind meal. Keep kids from turning curiosity into experiments. When the pit opens, steam lifts. A hush always happens first, as if gratitude asked for a beat of silence. Portions follow old fairness, and waste fails to get an invitation. Far north, stone lamps and measured wicks make soup into engineering. Pieces small enough to cook before fuel runs out share space with greens and sometimes berries. Simmer never tips into a boil. Pebbles lift or lower pot height like notches on a scale. Trim the wick, narrow the flame. Watch a neat necklace of bubbles, physics as partner, not adversary. Where cassava grows thick and green, cooks turn a tricky root into patient bread. Grated pulp rides a long woven press like a clever snake to squeeze out trouble. Dried pulp sifts and roasts on a hot plate. Flatbreads crack clean and keep for weeks without needing attention. Knowledge turned into habit so completely it looks like common sense. In thin air that writes frost at dusk, Andean kitchens fold weather into design. Potatoes move through freeze, thaw, press, and dry to become light travelers that rehydrate into soups without losing manners. Quinoa and amaranth pop like soft applause, adding a protein ribbon and a playful bite. A house that knows this routine carries a hedge against long nights and short promises. Cacao appears as a focused drink, not a dessert. Nibs roast, grind on warm stones into a flowing paste, then meet hot water, chile, and flowers or vanilla where that plant belongs. A carved whisk spins between palms until foam rises like a sudden cloud. The cup sharpens attention without asking for sugar. Memory carries it longer than the heat does. Seasonings play like a quartet. Chile warmth when the stew needs sun. Epazote to make beans courteous. Cedar beds that scent smokehouses so meat tastes like itself plus weather. Sumac cones turn water pink and precise. Salt, when present, remains a cameo, not a monologue. Hearth tools earn personalities by being reliable. The cedar paddle that brushes oils goes dark along its working face. A horn ladle never warps, perches perfectly on the lip. A clay pot's yearly ring drops a half note as hairline changes a line. Still sound, still trusted. The reed fan learns the wrist that owns it. The fan and the hand become one sentence. Foods that carry meaning introduce a courtroom tone. Batter stirred by one person while another speaks. A loaf that rests until a song reaches a certain line. Sharing that requires specific hands and specific words. The method teaches reverence without turning stiff. Taste becomes memory's sworn testimony. Big gatherings make logistics visible. Stone team, grill team, stew team, water team. Runners carry small messages that prevent big mistakes. If someone meets a task with pride instead of attention, the food submits data usually persuasive. By night's end, the ground looks cared for. The air smells like abundance, boosted by restraint. Trade keeps changing edges, not center. An iron kettle arrives and proves resilience without insulting clay's grace. Glass beads dazzle but don't season stew. They stay out of the pot. Salt gets easier to find and, paradoxically, gets used with a lighter touch abundance, granting elegance. Seeds travel with songs. Both settle and adapt. Safety remains a discipline, not a mood. Strips dry thin so air can move. Racks hang high to discourage bold animals. Ferments rest cool and get watched with the kind of vigilance that prevents speeches. Stones are tested before they're trusted. When doubt shows up, the food in question bows out. These habits are older than arguments. Water looks easy because the complex parts got removed by repetition. Springs first. Rivers where current cleans itself. Seep holes beside muddy flows so silk settles. Boil folded into ordinary cooking. When a filter stack of cloth, sand, and charcoal is needed, it's built without ceremony. The tongue confirms what the eyes suggested. Storage is architecture wearing a pantry badge. Cache pits sit where ground drains and animals don't patrol. Their covers disappear so completely that owners practice walking past with a blank face. Clay jars seal with pitch or laced lids. Rafters share smoke and air at a ratio learned by experience. Parfleche cases ride journeys and stack in corners with painted signals anyone literate in the household code can read. Instruction continues like a river. A pot simmering too hard for stew whispers at the edge. One small stick across coals nudges it right. A bread that clings to stone yields to patience and a thin blade rather than force. Tasting on time prevents essays later. No diplomas, just more trust and better jobs. Markets trade methods as effectively as goods. A drift of smoke downwind tells you wood type and discipline. A spoon of stew persuades more than a promise. A new basket weave drains faster. 3 cooks nod and decide to copy it. A travelling pot shape balances better on a certain fire. Next season it's local. Adoption happens the same way supper does. Quietly, repeatedly, and because it works. Storm kitchens don't improvise under pressure. They prepare before pressure. Fuel under cover, water in more than one place, travel food hung where hands find it in the dark. Fires shrink, rocks ring them tight. Hot stones keep a stew waiting without burning more wood. Calm is stored too, and pulled out on schedule. Laughter shows up like spice in a recipe for keeping a room intact. By dusk, rabbit stew that started plain speaks with bones and time. A last handful of greens brightens the colour and the mood. A pinch of dried berry keeps fat polite. Flatbreads slide off hot stone sounding like paper leaving paper. They fold without cracking and carry fish, greens or beans without boasting. The last taste is often the smallest. A cube of squash with syrup, a toasted nut placed with mock ceremony, a sip of mint that tastes like permission to rest. Coals tuck into ash like birds. Tools lean where dawn will reach without thinking. The room exhales. Tomorrow we'll ask different questions. The answers will come from the same steady hands. Night settles into the rafters the way steam settles on a lid, soft, inevitable, and surprisingly informative. The fire is no longer a spectacle. It's a line of living coals, a silvered crescent on dark earth, hot enough to answer but not to shout. Pots find their places by feel. You test distance with the back of a hand and a memory of yesterday's scorch, then nudge a handle half an inch and listen. A lid cracks open just enough to let a curl of vapor slip out, and even that breath has a tone. Peppery? Pull it farther. Flat? A pinch of herb. Too frantic? Shift to the hold warm zone and let patience do the cooking. Late soups are the second act of the day's effort. Bones that have been speaking in low voices since afternoon now surrender their last gentle sentences to water. Grains go in just a fistful to swell and stop one heartbeat before stubborn. A palmful of pulled dry meat loosens in the heat, returning to tenderness with the humility of something that's been useful twice. A spoon of clean fat, saved and proud of it, rounds the broth so it sits warm in the chest without turning heavy. Down by the river, the shoreline does double duty as pantry and stove. A flat rock that baked in the sun all day is coaxed close to the coals and becomes a teacher of steady heat. Trout, scaled and rinsed in water that still remembers snow, lie skin down until a corner lifts like a page you're ready to turn. The first flip is a vote of confidence. A pinch of wild onion or a smear of tart berry keeps the palate awake without heckling the fish. Bones go back to the current with a wordless thanks. Circles appreciate being closed. Night tools are quieter than day tools. The fan works in half size, not gusts. Tongs balance at a sweet spot so a rock feels weightless, and you can find that fulcrum with your eyes shut because you've done it in the dark 100 times. A wooden paddle is both spoon and stethoscope. You tap the pot once and hear whether the simmer is hiding on the windward side. It's a conversation without verbs, just a fluent exchange of nudges and sounds. Some households cultivate a travelling habit at home. Bring a stew to a near boil, then tuck the pot into a nest of folded blankets and woven mats, set it aside, and let stored heat do what open flame would only dramatize. Breakfast can share the embers without elbowing. Wood lasts longer because pride stays shorter. While the bundle works, people talk. It's amazing how often stories flow when no one has to sprint to catch a boil. Flavor after dark tends toward the kind that smooths foreheads. Mint crushed against a cup with a pestle rises like a reminder to breathe. Spruce tip or cedar tip tea is kept whisper-light perfume, not perfume counter. A shaving of maple block or a drop of honey tips bitterness into balance and draws a line under the day. When a gust rattles the walls and the flame flickers into a spray of sparks, the room pivots without drama. Screen turned, flap shifted, a pot slid 2 inches, the surface hush returning like a well-trained dog. Children watch this ballet of tiny fixes and think nothing of it. 10 years later, those same hands will move in the same arcs and swear they taught themselves. Morning doesn't knock. It simply changes the color of the smoke at the roof. Coals wake under a lace of ash. A reed fan persuades rather than commands. A pot that slept on the outskirts edges inward, and the stew puckers at the surface as if finishing the sentence it began last night. The first flavors are considerate. A thin porridge of ground seed shines like wet stone. A spoon of nut butter melts into a baseline that makes the bowl honest. Dried berries loosen into bright punctuation. No speeches, just a cheerful, good morning. Tasks volunteer for their people. One pair of hands checks the racks where last night's fish cooled beneath a net the raccoons couldn't argue with. Another wipes the griddle stone with a twist of grass that still remembers yesterday's oil. Someone else thumps a cache lid and reads the ground the way a carpenter reads grain. Damp? Wait. Dry? Draw from the back row first. The whole room hums like a hidden stream, steady, useful, not asking for applause. Wood is screened like a job applicant. Hardwoods promise slow, clean coals. Softwood kindling is hired for 5 minutes and then shown the door before it starts telling jokes with sparks. Resign-rich twigs get the match, but not the long-term contract. You can hear a log's resume by tapping it against another. Bright clack means dry and ready. Dull thud means try me next week. Stacks sit under a lean, to that remembers rain's personality. Nothing ruins a day like a surprise sponge where a stove ought to be. A good hearth is more than a circle of stones. It's a tiny weather system. In a lodge, the smoke flaps earn their keep, turned by the same instinct that lets birds ride thermals. In a longhouse, the central line of fire heats many pots, while vents carry the room's breath upward without stealing the conversation. The goal is a steady draw and a low flame, not a camp brochure. Dramatic fires are for stories. Dinner wants discipline. Storage is a second stomach and deserves the same courtesy as the first. Cache pits get dug on ground that drains and smells like nothing. Bark or woven mats line the inside. A tight lid goes on. A skin of clean earth disguises it so well that the owners practice walking by without glancing down. Clay jars nestle half-buried where soil remembers cool afternoons. Pitch seals what lids can't. Rafters become neighborhoods of smoke and air. Parfleche cases stack in painted ranks. Their patterns are private index seed here, dried meat there, medicine there. Do not touch unless you like being a ghost. Ferments live under supervision, not superstition. Cold corners are chosen, vessels are clean enough to make a surgeon nod, and noses get the deciding vote. If anything murmurs the wrong tune, it's retired without debate. In these kitchens, caution isn't fear, it's love with a long horizon. Ash is not an ending, it's a tool. Clean ash scrubs pots without scalding the clay. Layered with sand and cloth, it filters water that insists on being argumentative until boiling can finish the conversation. A dusting around a cache mouth convinces crawling things to register elsewhere. Yesterday's fire makes today's chores shorter, which is the only kind of magic worth trusting. Markets and shared work grounds trade methods as profitably as goods. The smell of a parched seed stall tells you everything about someone's heat control before you taste a thing. A stack of flatbreads flexed at the edge crackles in the same even meter as a well-tuned drum. A spoon of stew on a communal ladle closes more deals than a dozen promises. Someone demonstrates a basket weave that drains in half the time, 3 makers nod, and by next season it's everywhere. A pot shape, proven on a mountain hearth, shows up on the river, balanced as if it grew there. When weather sharpens its teeth, good kitchens get calm. Fuel moves under cover, water caches multiply, travel food rises on cords where hands can find it in the dark. Fires shrink and sprout stone collars tight enough to keep embers from wandering. A pile of river rocks sits warming at the edge because a waiting stew is cheaper than a blazing log pile. Even patience is staged. A joke about the last time a pancake tour gets told just when someone needs to unclench their jaw. Errors are tuition, not tattoos. Bread that fell into the ash and shook itself off becomes a house favorite with a whisper of smoke that guests pretend not to notice and then request by name. A too-thin soup learns from a fist of seed meal and becomes the winter standard. A fish turned once too often inspires a rule. Flip when the corner lifts itself, not when boredom tells you to. Every family has a dish named after a mistake. Every cook worth trusting can laugh at theirs. Across coasts and basins, deserts and timberlines, the melodies change, but the rhythm stays. Coax heat, invite air, ask water, honor time. Iron arrives and doesn't banish clay. Salt gets cheaper and people use less. Peppers travel and learn to behave in new stews. The center holds because the center is attention. Not a gadget, not a trend. Eyes, ears, fingertips, breath. By the time the moon leans toward the ridge, the last pot is finishing its thought. A handful of chopped greens at the end brightens the surface and the room. Flatbreads nest under a cloth like pages waiting for the next chapter. A child tests a cake's readiness by watching steam ribbon off the edge and, without thinking, makes the one true flip. No one claps. Someone slides a finished piece into that small hand like a medal and starts a story about the first time they got it right. The night holds still long enough to hear both the story and the simmer, and then the house turns down its volume to match the coals. Tomorrow will be different in the details and identical in the principles. The fire likes it that way. So do the people who keep it. By midday, the kitchen is a crossroads. Iron patience from the morning simmer meets the quick errands of heat. The coals have slumped into a velvet red, flecked with ash like frost on dark soil. You don't stoke them high. You coax their edges inward, making a low arena where flat stones can glow without flaring and where a pot can sit half on, half off, like a foot testing water before a dive. This is not a spectacle. It's a conversation, and you can hear it in the way the hiss of a damp stick shrinks to a whisper before you set it down. Corn dough proves, again, that architecture and appetite share a wall. A handful becomes a disc. A disc becomes a map of heat. The trick is simple and merciless. Spread, set, wait, lift once. If the edge lifts itself, you were listening. If not, the bread argues back and tears. The fix isn't force, it's time. Give the stone one more breath. Brush with a finger of oil pulled from a gourd. Try again. The room doesn't judge. It remembers. Beans are the anti-drama heroes of the day. They live just off the boil, where the surface quivers but doesn't rage. A cracked lid lets off arrogance and keeps in patience. A splash of rendered fat smooths the ride. A crushed sprig of epazote or wild mint persuades the stubborn skins to act like good neighbors. You learn to test doneness with your tongue, not your teeth press a bean against your palate. If the skin slips without announcing itself, lunch is closing in. Someone is working the mortar, and that sound, the low, sandy thud, keeps time like a drummer in the next room. Seeds kiss hot clay in a shallow pan until they pop into brightness. Half go to a paste with salt and a touch of oil, the rest wait for their cue to become crunch. A small jar of ash water sits at the edge. Its job finished hours ago when it loosened the hulls of corn and quietly lifted nutrition, the way a friend lifts a heavy end of the table without making a speech. Tool care happens in the margins where most people think nothing is happening. A blade's edge meets a stone with a whisper that's more about angle than strength. A spoon's handle gets a binding of rawhide where fingers complain. The fan's lashing is checked. The tong's bite is tried on an idle pebble. Nothing in this room is extra. Every object has an alibi and a future. Outside, the day writes errands on people's feet. Two walk toward the patch where amaranth stands like a red-green cloud. Another heads to the alder shade where mushrooms sketch themselves after last night's rain, and a pair shoulder a coil trap for fish, because the river's been speaking in silver for 3 days. They don't go empty-handed. Every basket knows exactly what it's for: tight weave for grain, open weave for air, a strap that crosses the chest, not the back, because good posture is part of longevity. Hunting days are logistics, not legend. Meat is protein, yes, but it's also timing and weather and rope. If you're lucky, the first cuts meet a ring of coals, not a flame, so fat renders without setting the clouds on fire. Ribs lean on green sticks at a surveyor's angle. Shoulders rest where heat rolls instead of bites. The best sign of success is silence broken by small knives, doing honest work, followed by the soft joke that someone tells to make sure the hands don't start shaking from hunger. Drying is insurance disguised as architecture. Racks go up in an afternoon that smells like wood shavings and smoke. Strips hang with even spacing. If they touch, they argue, and you'll pay later. Hardwood smoke whispers, fruitwood flatters. Resinous stuff is kept on a leash. After a day or 3, weather decides good strips bend without breaking and look like they've learned to say no politely. Pound a share with berries, marry it to clear fat, and you've made travel's favourite coin. Compact, dense, patient. 1 square under the tongue, and a hard hour becomes an ordinary one. Back in the shade, a clam bake grows out of the tide chart, and a pile of well-behaved stones. Fire first, stones second, seaweed into a glossy mattress, then clams and fish and roots in a stack that respects the clock of each thing. Cover with mats and sand. When you peel it back, steam writes a white script against the sky, and everyone goes quiet for 3 good heartbeats. The first shells open with a dignified click. Broth gathers in the hollows like tidewater that decided to be soup. Not every place has salt. In some kitchens it arrives as a rock in a pocket. In others it's a neighbour's favour. Where it doesn't show up, you learn to ask brightness from berries, savour from smoke, punch from herbs, calm from fat. You taste a spoon, you ask, "Is this honest?" If the answer is yes, you stop. If the answer is nearly, you add a fingernail of maple block or a breath of vinegar you coaxed from a forgotten wine. You're not decorating, you're aligning. Water is a colleague, not a utility. Springs are courted, not used. You learn which ones sulk in late summer and which ones sing all year. River draws happen where the current cleans itself, not where the bank is convenient. Seep holes appear beside muddy runs. The first gallon is for the ground, not the pot. Boiling folds into the day like punctuation. A rolling minute is a full stop, a shimmer is a comma. Cloth, sand, a hand of last night's fine ash. These are filters. Germ theory comes later. Prudence is older. Children don't help. They work, scaled to their bones. The littlest carries tinder and learns not to walk like a storm. The middle one fans coals until ash stops flying. The oldest holds the paddle at the right distance so steam kisses knuckles but doesn't blister. Corrections are short. Praise is specific. Good turn. Waited for the lift. Heard the simmer move. The diploma is a nod, and a clean bowl slid across without comment. Etiquette is the room's second gravity. Elders first when that's the rule. Guests offered the clean flaking piece of fish. The firekeeper handed a crisp edge of bread because steadiness deserves a ceremony. If someone returns empty-handed from a hunt, a second ladle finds their bowl first. not charity policy. The story of the day is told after the pot is quiet, and the best dessert is laughter that doesn't embarrass anyone. By late afternoon, the sun has thinned to something you can hold in a palm. That's when the retained heat trick pays again. The grain pot brought to a breathless near-boil goes into its nest of blankets and woven mats. An hour later it has moved from wet to willing without stealing from the woodpile. Meanwhile, the stew pot edges closer to the coals. A wooden spoon stands upright for just a second, then slowly leans. That lean is a language you learn by living inside it. There's always a little engineering folded into the ordinary. A green stick grate sprung between two rocks gives you height without iron. A forked branch slides under a spit and clicks into the same notch every time because somebody took an afternoon to make that notch. A sling of hide becomes a boil bag once it's rinsed and ringed by stones. Hot rocks commute from fire to liquid and back again, never arguing because the tongs are right and the rhythm is steady. Back up, sit ready. Extra tongs, extra fan, extra wick for the lamp. Redundancy isn't paranoia. It's courtesy to the people you feed. Trade keeps slipping new nouns into old sentences. A pepper with ideas arrives from a road you'll never walk. You let it speak in half syllables until you know its temper. An iron pot survives a drop that would have retired a clay elder. Good. Now you have both. One for violence, one for grace. Someone shows a basket whose corners don't leak seed, and a week later you can't remember how you put up with the old way. That's not fashion. That's drift slow, sensible, contagious. When the wind turns contrary, the kitchen doesn't argue. It rotates screens, lowers lids, banks heat into two crescents, one for cooking, one for keeping. A pot of hot water lives in the corner like a helpful cousin ready to thin a too-proud sauce, to warm a chilled hand, to douse a flirtatious ember. The floor is kept clear because tripping is a kind of weather you can control. And when the first stars arrive like punctuation over the ridge, the day closes its parentheses. Grains loosen with a ladle of broth and sigh into just right. Fish taken off a breath early becomes perfect by the time it reaches the board. Greens meet heat for a minute that feels shorter than a song and longer than a blink. Flatbreads stack under a cloth that smells faintly of smoke and clean hands. Portions travel in arcs that never collide. The last clink of spoons against clay sounds, for a moment like rain on a summer roof. Cleanup isn't an afterthought. It's rehearsal for tomorrow. Pots soak while the coals still remember how to help. Ash is sifted to save the charcoal with another hour left in it. Tools hang in the order a sleepy morning hand will need them. Embers get tucked under a breathing lid. The room lifts its shoulders and sets them down. Somewhere outside, a small night animal considers the smell of fish and declines to argue. Inside, the ledger no one can see gets another page of neat, invisible entries. Wood carried, joke landed, rule kept, meal shared. Niche defended the one where attention, not equipment, defines the craft. Afternoon swings toward evening, and the kitchen starts shifting from make to maintain. That's when the quiet decisions matter most, the inch that a pot moves. The single stick laid across coals to lower the simmer from confident to considerate, the way a lid is tipped so steam doesn't throw its weight around. This is the hour when good cooks look like they aren't doing much. In truth, they're piloting a room. Seasons sit in the pot as plainly as ingredients. Spring is quick heat and quick color greens that only want a minute. Fish that want gentleness. Broths that taste like the first clear day after too much weather. Summer is restraint. Drying racks. Shade. Meals that ask more of wind than of flame. Autumn builds layers, roasted roots, toasted nuts. Long simmers that turn busy into calm. Winter is patience wrapped in steam. The room becomes a small engine that runs on long vowels and longer bubbles. If you blindfold the tongue and ask it which month it's in, the kitchen can answer without looking out the door. Teaching happens in inches too. A new hand learns to listen to water by the way it beads on a spoon before it boils. Learns to read a fire by the music of popping resin versus the even hush of hardwood. Learns to time. A flip, by the way, steam starts to ribbon off a flatbread's edge. Corrections land like taps, not sermons. Wait one breath. Turn your wrist. Hear that? The diploma, as always, is a job done unsupervised and a bowl handed over without ceremony. Tool stories are just as instructive as recipes. The cedar paddle that darkened where it brushed oil has been smoothing attitudes for a decade. The horn ladle, still straight despite 100 hot lips, balances itself on every pot rim like it signed a contract. A clay pot rings a half note lower each year as micro scratches line up into a choir. It still holds water, still holds heat, still holds the trust of the person who remembers the morning it survived its second firing. None of these things are just tools. They are co-workers with tenure. Where water is bossy, kitchens get clever. Springs get sheltered with stones and lids, so hooves and paws can't turn sweetness into mud. River draws happen on clean current, not on lazy eddies tempting tired feet. Seep holes beside a brown run settle the silt before the boil, which is both chemistry and common sense. Cloth, sand, and a pinch of last night's clean ash build a filter stack that takes the argument out of a bucket before the fire finishes the debate. Later, people will draw diagrams about microbes. These kitchens draw water the right way and call it Tuesday. Storage is a second kitchen underground. Cache pits sit where soil drains. Bark or mats line the walls. The lid fits like a promise. A skin of clean earth disguises the scent. Families practice walking past without looking down, because secrecy is part of safety. Clay jars rest half-buried where the earth remembers cool. Rafters keep a ladder of racks in moving air that also carries the smoke's small sermon. Parfleche cases stack like briefcases full of weeks. The painted codes on their faces are a literacy in themselves. Seed, meat, medicine, keep out, share. Safety doesn't wear a neon vest here. It wears habit. Stones for boiling are tested dry at the edge of the fire so hidden moisture can betray itself harmlessly. Knives move away from the hand that holds, not toward it. Sleeves live an honest distance from flame. Ferments are watched like infants. If a smell speaks the wrong language, it is thanked for its effort and retired. Fires are collared by rocks set close enough to catch leaps of enthusiasm. Water waits in arm's reach, day or night. There is no drama, and because of that, there are no stories about avoidable accidents. Trade tweaks the edges of the table without moving the center. A dried pepper with new opinions gets a short audition, half a pod in a stew that knows how to forgive. If it behaves, it earns a seat. If it hogs the conversation, it becomes a medicine, a dye, or a joke. Iron kettles arrive and prove that toughness and forgiveness are a package. Clay stays, because even heat and friendly flavor are not going out of style. Salt gets easier to find, so cooks use less, which is the exact kind of irony kitchens admire. Seeds travel with stories. Both are planted carefully. Festivals are logistics with banners. A clam bake starts with a tide chart and ends with steam writing its name in the sky. A cedar box stone boil becomes theatre river rocks hiss as they kiss water. Smoke drifts in polite lines, and a crowd learns how heat can be carried from flame to pot with nothing but tongs and timing. A horno opens like a kept promise. Bread knocks hollow. Stews slide to the back where even heat turns stubborn into tender. There's a pit team, a grill team, a stew team, a water team. Runners keep the small messages moving so the big mistakes never happen. Nobody shouts because the plan anticipated the parts that usually make people shout. Etiquette is a tool too. The person who kept fire steady gets the crisp edge of bread. The guest receives the clean flaking piece of fish. Elders taste first when custom says so. Children earn seconds by finishing tasks, not because hunger is a contest, but because participation is. When someone comes back empty-handed from a hunt, the ladle finds their bowl early. This is policy, not pity. It keeps tomorrow on speaking terms with everyone. On lean weeks, the menu tightens but doesn't apologize. Steam replaces long boils, stretching fuel without stretching luck. Dried stews crumble into water and become lunch halfway through a chore, not at the end of it. Seed cakes ride in pouches like sensible coins. Fat is clean, stored in dark, and asked to do what it's good at: carry flavor, satisfy, last. Sweetness shows up as a sentence, not an essay. A shaving of maple, a splash of roasted pod syrup, a handful of berries that turn a bowl into a complete thought. Wind can be managed the way you manage a lively cousin. Screens pivot, lids get weights. Fire splits into two crescents, one for cooking, one for keeping. Sparks learn humility inside tight stone rings. If the draft sulks, a fan persuades it into a good mood without blowing ash where ash has no business. Floors remain clear because tripping is not allowed to write the menu. Errors graduate into recipes with surprising speed. Bread that toppled into ash comes back as a deliberate, kissed version that people ask for with a grin. A soup that went thin during a rainstorm gets finished with roasted meal stirred in at the end. Now it's the winter standard, with a name that nudges the memory of that wet afternoon. Fish that stuck reminds the rock to be oiled and the cook to watch for the lift. These are origin stories made edible. Children climb the ladder in quiet rungs, fan without dust, stir without scraping, swap a hot stone without splashing, flip the first cake that puffed on time, read the simmer by sound and not by wish. Each rung is a small job earned, not a trophy given. Competence is affection in this house. You can tell by the way the good bowl finds the right hands. Markets turn into classrooms in the open. A line of smoked fish announces wood type to anyone who sniffs with intent. A spoon of stew convinces a skeptic faster than 3 promises. A basket weave that drains fast but doesn't leak seed gets copied and localized by next season. A pot shape that balances better on a 3-stone hearth becomes common in places that never met the original maker. Innovation here isn't a press release. It's a series of small, inherited adjustments. Drift, but deliberate. Mid-afternoon is the hour for retained heat cooking, the old trick that feels like a new invention every time fuel is scarce. Bring a pot to a controlled breath. Tuck it into blankets and woven padding. Let the room finish what the fire started. Grains plump without sticking. Beans relax without breaking. People talk instead of hover. Woodpile smiles. By the time shadows lengthen, the day's arc is already convincing itself into a conclusion. Ribs near heat, not over it. Release fat without drama. Fish at a respectful distance. Lacquer their skins. Greens flash and stay bright. Flatbreads fold without cracking. The spoon stands for a second in the grain pot and then leans, confessing, ready. Portions travel in easy arcs. The last taste is small and memorable. A cube of squash brushed with syrup. A toasted nut that clicks between teeth. A sip of mint that whispers, enough. Cleanup begins before mouths finish. Pots soak while coals still remember how to help. Ash is sifted to save leftover charcoal with one more job in it. Tools return to their hooks in the order a sleepy morning will want them. Embers tuck under a breathing lid so dawn starts with persuasion, not invention. The floor shows no glimmer of stray heat. The air keeps the scented footnote of wood, herb, and a little sweet. The ledger of the room, the one no eye can see but every hand feels, adds today's neat line items. Wood carried, rule kept, joke landed, method shared, niche honoured. Night inhales, the coals blink, and the kitchen never finished. Always current sets itself to wake in the same calm grammar tomorrow. Climb a little higher, and supper changes shape. In the thin air of mountain country, frost writes its name on everything that forgets to be humble. Potatoes learn a trick from the night itself: freeze, thaw, press, dry, turning from perishable tubers into light, durable travellers that come back to life in a pot like old friends who knock before they enter. Drop them into a clear broth, and they soften without losing their manners. Quinoa and amaranth, the small, unapologetic grains, rinse clean, then bloom into tidy curls that pop softly between teeth. A bowl like that is a map of altitude. Bright, lean, efficient. Follow the trade winds downslope and a different classroom opens. Cacao appears first as smell-roasted nibs, warm and shy. Stones are warmed so the fat flows. The paste is ground until it glistens, then whisked into hot water with a carved stick rolled fast between palms. Chili steps in, just enough to wake the tongue, and a flower note, vanilla where it belongs, rides the top like a thin ribbon of scent. No sugar needed. This is focus in a cup, a drink for thinking rather than for dessert. Seasonings behave like a small, good band. Heat from chilies plays lead only when invited. Epazote or its cousins steady beans the way a hand steadies a ladder. Cedar beds, sweetgrass braids, and sage send smoke that seasons without turning dinner into furniture. Staghorn sumac cones steep into a tart, pink drink that answers hot weather with better manners than ice water. Salt, even when plentiful, still declines to shout. Hearth tools earn reputations as surely as cooks do. The cedar paddle that brushes oil onto salmon darkens with service and fits a palm like memory. A horn ladle never angles crooked, no matter how many hot rims it rides. The old clay pot rings a touch lower each year, a micro-choir of tiny scratches but still distributes heat like a patient teacher. Even the fan reed and twine learns a wrist and disappears into it, moving air like an extra breath rather than a gust. Some foods change tone when the day's work turns into ceremony. Corn batters are measured with a seriousness that's warm, not rigid. A dough rests until a song reaches a certain line. Hands slow by one visible beat, not because the pot demands it, but because the people do. On those days, the room has its own gravity. Serving looks like testimony. Each portion has a meaning older than hunger. Large gatherings are logistics in polite clothes. There's a pit team who knows stones and timing, a grill team who understands distance and restraint, a stew team who can keep three kinds of simmer walking calmly, and a water team who treat that element like the boss it is. Runners move messages before mistakes mature. A cedar box boil turns into theatre when glowing rocks travel in a deliberate parade, hissing into broth that blooms into colour and scent. A sandpit bake, layered with seaweed and roots and shells, is capped and quieted. When the lid lifts, steam makes a white curtain, and everyone pauses not out of superstition, but out of gratitude for timing that behaved. Trade alters the tool chest and the pantry without touching the physics. An iron kettle shows up and wins a place for surviving a drop that would have retired clay. Clay stays because it coaxes flavour where iron can only endure heat. Glass beads sparkle and change nothing about soup. Pepper seeds arrive down a canoe route or a horse trail. They start small, learn the household's manners, and either join the repertoire or retire to a jar with a label that means later. The centre remains attention, not novelty. Safety looks like tidiness because it is. Boiling stones are tested at the edge so hidden water can hiss harmlessly before anyone lifts tongs. Sleeves keep their distance from flames. Knives move away from the hand that holds, not toward it. Ferments live in cool corners and get both eyes and a nose every day. If a jar speaks the wrong language, that food is thanked and discarded. Fires are ringed tight. Water stands in reach. The only accident stories worth retelling are the ones that end in laughter and a lesson. Water management is a slow choreography honed by repetition. Springs get a collar of stones and a lid, so hooves can't make mud. River draws happen where current is clean, not where bank is comfortable. Seep holes beside cloudy runs let sediment settle before boiling finishes the argument. A nest of cloth, sand, and last night's ash filters out most of what you can see. The boil handles what you can't. The method predates lab coats by a long, practical margin. Storage is architecture with appetite. Cache pits sit on high, dry ground. Bark and woven mats line the walls. A tight lid goes down. A hush of clean earth hides scent from noses that read like novels. Clay jars, half buried, find their personal winter in summer. Rafters carry racks where smoke walks and air moves. Parfleche cases stack in painted order patterns that tell literate eyes which holds seed, which holds meat, which is medicine, which is for guests. The system is old because it works. Instruction keeps pace with fire, short, exact, and warm. Hear the simmer move to the windward side? Turn now, steam's ribboning. Knife away from the fingers that pay your rent. Praise is specific. Nice weight, good lift, quiet hand, and the diploma is the job done without anyone hovering. In this house, competence is affection. You can tell by which bowl lands where and who gets the crisp corner of bread. Markets are schools you can smell. A rack of smoked fish whispers wood choice to anyone standing downwind with an opinion. A spoon of stew persuades more powerfully than a list of adjectives. A basket weave that drains fast but doesn't leak seed spreads by imitation before lunch is over. A pot shape that balances better on a 3-stone hearth migrates upriver in memory, not on paper. Innovation here is drift small, testable, contagious. When weather campaigns, kitchens don't posture, they adjust. Fuel moves undercover. Water has twins in 2 places. Travel food seed cakes, dried stews, good fat hangs in reach. Fires shrink and wear snug stone collars. Hot rocks wait near the edge so a pot can catch up without burning wood to make a point. Calm is staged, same as kindling. Regional voices stay loud even as methods rhyme. Coasts answer in brine and lacquered skin. Deserts reply with shade and slow sweetness. Prairies speak in angles and patience. Woodlands hum in acorn gentleness and hickory perfume. Mountains keep soups lean and grains articulate. Across all of it, the grammar stays. Roast, simmer, steam, smoke, dry, share. You could walk 1,000 miles and still recognize the accent of restraint and the vocabulary of heat. Late afternoon is the hour for old wisdom that feels like an invention every time fuel is scarce. Retained, heat cooking. Bring grain to the brink, then wrap the pot in blankets and woven padding. Let time finish what fire began. The woodpile sighs with relief. Hands free, the room clicks into maintenance. Screens pivot with the wind, lids gain or lose a pebble, 2 crescents of coals, one for cooking, one for keeping glow like punctuation marks. Dinner becomes a run of small, correct decisions. Grains loosen with a ladle of broth and settle into just right. Fish, pulled a breath early at the fire, arrives perfect on the board. Greens flash and stay bright, a minute shorter than impatience would like. Flatbreads fold without cracking, the reward for ash-treated dough and a patient stone. Portions travel in graceful arcs. The last taste is small and precise. A nut that clicks, a cube of squash brushed with a shy syrup, a sip of mint that says, enough. Clean up is tomorrow's preface. Pots soak while coals still remember how to help. Ash is sifted to rescue lumps of charcoal with another hour in them. Tools hang in the order, a sleepy morning will want them. Embers tuck under a breathing lid, so dawn starts with persuasion, not invention. The floor shows no stray glow. The air keeps a footnote of wood, herb, and a little sweet. And if you listen as the house gets quiet, you can hear the ledger of the room unwritten, undeniable, adding today's entries. Wood carried, rule kept, lesson learned, joke landed, niche upheld. The moon lifts, the coals wink, and the kitchen never finished. Always current rests in the calm grammar that will wake it again. Same principles, different weather. Night doesn't fall in a kitchen like this. It settles, the way flour settles after a good sift. Coals draw inward, a necklace of silver ash on a bed of ruby. Pots migrate to their night posts. One in the warm line for a last, shy simmer. One off to the side to sleep with a lid crooked just enough to breathe. The lamp flame is trimmed to a narrow petal. When it's right, the light is one colour, not two, and the pot above shows a daisy chain of tiny bubbles around the edge, simmers quiet punctuation, not boils exclamation. Late soups are an exercise in restraint. The broth is already wise bones given time, roots given patience, a spoon of clean fat set aside from earlier work. Now you add only what won't shout. A fist of greens that will gloss and soften in a handful of breaths, a crumble of last night's grain to give body without sludge, a pinch of herb rubbed between fingers until it wakes and remembers its job. The bowl that comes off that corner of the hearth doesn't perform. It reconciles. You feel it land behind the ribs and tell the whole chassis, stand down. Night has tools daylight forgets. The fan becomes a whisperer, not a whip. You move ash with the back of a spoon so sparks don't think they've been invited. Tongs learn your hand so well you can lift a cherry-hot stone without looking, turn it in the air as if it were a thought, and set it exactly where the simmer needs a nudge. The old wooden paddle, the one with the heat-darkened grip and the nick from the day it leapt, taps a pot. The sound says which quadrant is working and which needs encouragement. In this light, you don't trust your eyes first. You trust your ears and the skin on your knuckles. Outside, the world edits its own recipe. Wind drops a tone and shifts a few degrees. Smoke takes the hint and threads a new seam along the rafters. Someone rises from a blanket without being called, sets a flat stone to lean differently, slides a screen a hand's width, and the room's whole temperament evens. Children see this and think it's nothing. Years later they'll make the same adjustment without knowing when they learned it. That's inheritance in a working house. Verbs that climbed into your bones when you weren't looking. Not every night is quiet. Storm nights have their own menu. Fires shrink and huddle inside tight rock collars. Lids gain weight. Anything that can fly is nested or tied. You don't plan braises that need hours of uninterrupted attention. You plan soups that accept delay, cakes that forgive second chances, travel food hung in reach in case the door has to become a road. Water is portioned into more than one place, because redundancy is just another word for foresight. Calm is staged, the way kindling is staged on purpose, before you need it. Preservation is night shift work. Racks of fish that spent the day in smoke are walked, checked, turned, spaced. You don't touch the thin ones, you encourage the thick ones to keep going toward that perfect bend without breaking. That means they'll travel without heartbreak. Strips of meat get a last brush of smoke where fat beaded but didn't run. A tray of parched seed gets a hand through it, the sound like a pocket full of tiny bells, dry, clean, done. A crock of ferment gets its sniff and its glance. If it's speaking in a dialect you don't recognize, the verdict is instant and untheatrical. Retire it. Tomorrow deserves better than bravado. Some nights are for sugar that isn't candy. Maple blocks shaved into ribbons and melted in the corner of a pot that's barely convinced to move. Roasted. Pod syrup warmed just enough to flow. Honey touched with smoke to keep it civilized. These aren't capstones so much as soft landings. A brush over a squash half that's been sitting in embers until its skin polishes itself. A spoon along the rim of a bowl of grain to remind the tongue that work is done for now. Sweetness is a guest. You seat it at the end of the table and give it one good story, not the floor. There's a time in the night, call it hinge hour, when the room is both asleep and awake. That's when the earliest riser does tomorrow's first favour. Embers are gathered and tucked under a blanket of sifted ash with a breathing hole the width of a finger. A pot is rinsed and leaned where dawn hands can find it in the dark. Tongs are nested. Fan is slid under the ledge. Knife is wiped and sheathed. The stone for sharpening laid where morning light will catch the angle. These are the gestures that keep mornings from starting with apologies. Ritual foods taste different at night. A corn dumpling folded in leaves and set over steam has a second life under low flame. Its scent becomes an argument for quiet voices. A rib of salmon brushed with oil from candlefish, set not over but near the coal crescent, turns the skin to varnish that clicks like thin ice when you break it. A berry reduction that would have shouted at noon whispers now, sharp enough to lift the fat and kind enough to leave you room to think about your day. Ceremony is less about ingredients than about tempo. Night slows the metronome, and the recipe bows. Teaching at night is a different class. You put a small hand over your wrist at the fan and say, "Feel the pause before the push." You let a new cook hover their palm over a stone until they can name its heat without touching. You set them to listening for the moments when a simmer migrates and ask them to point, eyes closed, to the hot side. When they're right twice, you hand them the paddle. When they're wrong, you say, "Again," and the room does not sigh. The diploma is a first solo rescue, a pot brought back from a boil by one stick laid across the coals and one hib of patience. Stories at night are also maintenance. They oil the hinge between days. No one performs. They circulate like the last ladle of broth hand to hand, comfortable and warming. There's the winter count about the year the fish ran late and the smokehouses were ready anyway because an elder remembered a similar spring. There's the joke about the bread that fell into the ash and came out famous. There's the quiet brag about the child who turned a sheet of blue corn batter in one motion and didn't grin until the second one behaved too. The telling files the edges off the day's sharp parts. Far out on the periphery beyond the lid, beyond the rack storage, holds the line while everyone sleeps. Cache lids wear their disguises. Clay jars exhale a cold earth smell. Parfleche seams stay tight where mice test and give up. The wind hurries along the ground and can't find a mouth to climb into. None of this happens by accident. Bark laid in the trench at the right angle. Mats dried in a wind that taught them to refuse mildew. Lids pinned with knots that open with cold fingers and not with paws. Architecture is a verb here. Then there's the art of going to zero. The last cup moves around the room spruce tip or mint or a bitter bark that persuades the head to lay down its lists. You can taste a little smoke in it, not because anyone wanted to show off, but because the air is honest and the cup is wood. Coals are combed flat. The last glow is an ember under mesh, bright as a firefly and twice as patient. The floor is swept, not because dirt is a crisis, but because a clean floor is a truce with tomorrow. Someone lays a hand on the cache lid and feels for damp that doesn't belong. Someone else tests the door peg. The room's spine straightens, then softens. Sleep in a cooking house has its own weather. It smells like wood that has said everything it needed to say, like a thread of sweetness that didn't get used up, like a ghost of broth that says you are not forgotten. If rain begins, a body wakes before a drop hits a cheek, a flap gets set and smoke finds a new staircase. If wind argues, a screen is adjusted, and the argument ends without a winner. The ledger in the dark adds a line you can't read but can feel. Fires minded, edges respected, niche intact. And then there is the small, immaculate noise that starts it all again. Ash whisked from ember, a reed fan's first whisper, a pot slid an inch into the new day. Morning will have its own opinions. The river may run high and ask you to draw water from the side channel. The clouds may sit and demand steam instead of flame. The cache may suggest roots over meat, or grain over roots. None of this is a crisis. The grammar holds. Fire asked, not ordered. Water courted, not assumed. Stone chosen, not guessed. Flavor balanced, not shouted. The room wakes in that truth as if it never slept at all. Morning starts like a secret that everyone already knows. A reed fan whispers, coals blink awake, and the pot that slept in the warm line slides forward an inch, as if it remembered its role without being asked. The room smells faintly sweet sap from last night's wood, a memory of broth, the clean dust of ash that acts like both eraser and ink in this kitchen. A hand hovers over the ember bed, count to 3. Feel the heat, ask politely, then feed it a sliver of wood instead of a speech. That's the tone for the day. Ask, don't order. Breakfast is the most democratic idea in the house. No grand announcement, just tasks that assign themselves. One person checks the racks where fish cooled under netting. The firm pieces bend without breaking, perfect travelling company for later. Another rinses a flat stone with a twist of grass. The surface keeps a hint of yesterday's seasoning and none of its grit. A third presses a palm to the cache lid, testing for damp that doesn't belong, and listens with their hand. The room hums like a river you can hear but can't yet see. Grinding is the quiet motor of morning. The mano fits the hand because the hand has shaped it. The metate slopes like a friendly horizon. The motion is steady, front, back, a little roll at the end. The sound is a low rasp that keeps time better than a clock. Flour falls cool, which matters more than a newcomer expects. Cool flour accepts water with better manners. A small holds a smaller hand on top and learns to let weight, not hurry, do the work. That's the curriculum here. Leverage before strength, patience before speed. Corn earns its chemistry badge again. Kernels that slept in alkali, ash water, or lime-shed skins with a shrug. They feel tender but not timid, ready to be pounded into dough that behaves. The scent is faintly mineral, clean, purposeful. Discs land on a warmed slab that passes the water skitters, disappears with dignity test. Each one puffs a little if timing is right, an honest handshake from heat. Turn once and only once. Panic flips are how you end up negotiating with crumbs. On coasts, breakfast might be thin, fish cakes, ground fish, and roots spread on the hot stone until the edges go glossy, then lifted in one smooth sheet. Inland, it might be corn porridge sturdy enough to hold a spoon at a brave angle. Either way, the first sip in the cup is spruce tip, mint, or a bitter bark that tidies the mind. None of it is loud, which is the point. Morning is for clarity, not fireworks. Water gets its share of attention because water keeps score. Springs are collared with stones and a lid so hooves can't turn sweetness into mud. River draws happen where current is honest, not where the bank is lazy. Seep holes dug beside a cloudy run settle the argument before boiling finishes it. Cloth, sand, and a pinch of clean ash build a filter that removes what you can see. A good roll removes what you can't. Later, someone will name microbes. For now, the method has names like careful and works. Toolkeeping rides alongside cooking like a twin. The knife edge meets the stone with a few exact passes, angle consistent, wrists quiet. You don't chase hair shaving sharp. You chase glides through tomato skin without starting a fight. The cedar paddle, darkened from years of brushing oil, gets a thin rub of fat at the grip. It's both preservation and affection. Tongs are checked for balance closed. They should rest in your hand without campaigning to fall open. The fan disappears into the wrist motion that owns it. Everything is ready before anything is urgent. Travel days write their own syllabus. Retained heat cooking earns its keep. Bring a pot to a modest boil, wrap it in fur and woven padding, and let time finish what flame began while feet do distance. Seed cakes, ground meal, nuts, dried fruit sit on cords where hands can find them without rooting through bags. Dried stew crumbles into a stream cup, add hot water and it turns into lunch without drama. A strip of meat softens under the tongue while you walk. The design principle is simple and stern. Fuel saved is fuel earned. Out on the river, a flat rock that spent the morning warming at the edge of the coals becomes a griddle with manners. Fish laid skin side down learns what even heat feels like. When a corner lifts cleanly, and the flesh flakes with a polite sigh, a quick turn finishes the job. A squeeze of tart berry resets the tongue between bites. Bones return to the current with a thank you. On the bank, a bundle of greens meets steam in a basket and collapses into gloss without surrendering colour. The broth that collects underneath is too good to brag about. Markets, whatever a region calls them, are where logistics and flavour shake hands. You learn as much by smell as by bargaining. A line of smoked fish tells you wood choice and discipline to anyone with a nose. A spoon of stew beats a treaty. A new basket weave drains faster and doesn't leak seed. 3 households copy it before noon. A pot shape balances better on a 3-stone hearth. By next season it's gone from novelty to normal. Innovation here is drift. Small, tested, contagious. Midday heat is managed, not defied. Fires shrink, move under shade, or rest altogether. Lunch becomes a conversation with cool seed drinks whisked in river water, fruit that needs no help, flatbreads cooked fast and folded with a smear of nut paste to turn duty into pleasure. Work reorganizes. Pounding, mixing, mending nets, checking cash lids, tying knots that open when wet fingers are cold. The kitchen keeps pace with the sun rather than with a dial. When the wind campaigns, the room becomes a laboratory of practical physics. Screens pivot to blunt gusts. Lids gain or lose a pebble to adjust whisper to simmer. 2 crescents of coals, one for cooking, one for keeping glow like punctuation marks at the edge of the hearth. A single stick laid across coals drops the temperature without drama. Sparks learn humility inside a tight ring of stones. The floor stays empty because tripping isn't allowed to edit the menu. Storage is not just inventory, it's architecture with appetite. Cash pits sit where ground drains. Bark and mats line the walls. A lid fits like memory. A hush of clean earth hides scent from noses that read like novels. Clay jars half buried find their own winter in summer. Rafters carry racks where smoke walks and air moves. Parfleche cases stack in painted order signals for those who can read them. Seed here, meat there, medicine in the one with the chevrons. It's an old system because it doesn't need fixing. Teaching rides shotgun with every task. A child learns to judge a hot stone by hovering a palm and counting. Tomorrow they'll swap a cherry-hot rock into a basket without splashing a soul. Another learns to turn a sheet of blue corn batter without gouging the slab. The day after, they do it twice, and remember not to grin until the third. Corrections arrive short and exact. Wait 1 breath. Now, listen. And the reward is not applause but trust. In this house, competence is how affection chooses to dress. Errors become recipes, the way storms become stories. A bread that fell into ash and came out dusted, crisp and perfect gets a name and a place on purpose. A stew that went thin while rain distracted a cook returns with roasted meal stirred at the end and becomes the winter standard. Fish that stuck writes a rule about oiling the rock and a rule about paying attention. None of it becomes shame. All of it becomes method. By early afternoon, the day has chosen its lanes. Grains that began under wraps finish in their blankets, heat held like a secret. Beans sit just off the hottest coals and quiver without boiling, skins ready to slip. A pot of hominy leans toward. Spoon stands, then falls, which everyone agrees means stick to your work, without becoming glue. Flat stones are seasoned again. Thin film of seed oil, rub until they're both slick and loyal. The first cake is a tester. It disappears near the cook's hand the instant it proves the day can proceed. Regional voices stay bright, even as techniques rhyme. Coastal mornings lack a salmon near heat, not over it. Desert kitchens use shade as an ingredient. Slow sweet agave telling patience to anyone who doubted. Prairie cooks lean ribs at an angle that would please a surveyor and roast by proximity. The wind teaches restraint. Woodlands hum with acorn porridge and hickory milk. Mountains keep soups lean, grains articulate. The grammar doesn't change. Roast, simmer, steam, smoke, dry, share. The accent is local and proud. And threaded through all of it, the racks, the stones, the paddles, the songs, is the same promise the room renews daily. The niche here is attention. Not gadgets, not spectacle. The physics are simple. The choice is exact, the flavour honest. By the time afternoon tips toward evening, the house has already written tomorrow's first paragraph. Embers banked, pots ready, tools placed where a sleepy hand will find them without hunting, a calm held in reserve like kindling. Supper will be cooked by steps that could survive a century of outages, which is another way of saying they were built right the first time. By late afternoon, the light leans gold, and the whole place starts to think in paragraphs instead of notes. This is the hour for enough but not too much enough heat to carry supper. not so much that you spend tomorrow's wood on tonight's story. The coals are drawn into 2 crescent beds again, one for cooking, one for keeping. A single split of hardwood goes to the back, propped so air can walk under it. The flame is small and sure, the kind you could forget if the smell of warming stone didn't keep reminding you that supper is already on its way. Menus tilt toward dishes that reward attention without demanding drama. Beans that have been murmuring all day slide toward tender. The test is a skin that slips between teeth without complaint. A pot of corn treated right, hulls loosened with ash water, or lime thickens to that, spoon stands, then politely yields, stage everyone knows is the sweet spot. A flat stone, seasoned with a thumb's worth of seed oil, goes from cool to useful. A drop of water skitters once, bows out, and leaves no trace. That's your green light for thin cakes that cook on patience, not on showmanship. Fish comes down to distance and timing. Near the coast, a fillet stands upright on a cedar stick, set a thoughtful arm's length from the glow. The skin tightens to lacquer. The flesh turns firm without drying into stubbornness. A cedar paddle shines with oil from candlefish, brushed in slow, even strokes that don't splash. A bright, tart berry sauce, nothing more than fruit and nerve, waits in a wooden cup to break the richness just when your tongue asks for a reset. Inland, trout rides a sun-warmed slab tucked against coals. You watch the corner lift, you count to 3, you turn once, and you're done. Roots arrive dressed for fall. Squash split and salted, set on their own skins beside the heat, until a thumb leaves a polite dent and the inside glows like it remembered summer. Camas, dug at the right hour of its life, has already done its long, patient turn underground. Today, a pressed cake of it thickens a stew without muddying the broth. Arrowhead slices fry in a shallow spoon of clean fat until their edges go copper and their centers soften just enough to make everyone circle closer. Greens don't need speeches, just respect. Nettles drop into a quick boil, leap back out before they lose their color, then slide into a pot of grain to lend it a little backbone. Ramps or wild onion go in at the end, heat kissing them once, not twice so their hello stays bright. Mint and cedar stay in the lane of scent unless asked to do medicine's job. This is supper, not a ceremony, and the kitchen keeps those lanes clear on purpose. The room itself starts doing the quiet logistics that make a meal feel inevitable. Someone brings a second bucket of water and leaves it where a sleep-warm body will reach in the morning without thinking. Someone else knots the storage cords with the same slip tie used by cold fingers in the dark, because you practice the way you'll need it. The fan slides into its slot, tongs nest like a pair of polite cranes. The knife sees 3 honest passes on the stone and goes back into its sheath without anyone announcing a sharpening. Tool-keeping is a kind of hospitality extended to your future self. Out beyond the hearth, the landscape is cooking too. Smokehouses whisper in pale ribbons, thin, steady, the color of restraint. The smell says hardwood, not resin. The spacing of the strips says someone who's done this long enough to trust air to do its share. Racks hold fish with room for breeze and smoke to braid. You can read the method in the shine. A whisper of oil, not a drip. A bend in the flesh, not a crack. If the wind shifts, a screen swivels. If the humidity rises, gaps widen by the width of a finger. Nothing panics. Adjustments are small and on time. The market, whatever name your place gives it, starts to assemble itself by custom as much as by plan. A blanket goes down. Bowls appear like commas. A cedar box is lined, filled with water, and ringed with stones that will soon be red to the bones. When the first of those stones crosses the air with tongs, hisses, and settles into the bath, it's a kind of drumbeat. People fall into roles they've earned. A pit team with hands that read heat through greenwood grips. A stew team that can hear a simmer shift across a pot. A grill team that knows when distance is flavor. Etiquette arrives with the same quiet competence as the tools. Elders are seated where the smoke won't test them. Kids get tasks scaled to their arms, fanning without flinging ash, carrying water without donation to the dust. Guests are offered the pieces that flatter the house. The clean, flaking belly of a fish. The first slice from a squash that opened like a promise. The cook eats last, but only after someone touches a shoulder and says, "Now," because humility that starves itself is just theatre. Trade folds in around the edges, as it always has. A neighbour brings a jar of peppers from downriver. They're roasted, pounded thin, and whisked into a broth until the heat shows up like a good joke felt, not shouted. A different family sets out tortillas from nixtamal dough, rolled thin on a comel that sings at exactly one pitch. The discs puff once, then settle. A handshake between fire and flour. Another basket opens on cakes of mesquite meal that smell like warm bread, and dry grass had a conversation. Nothing replaces anything. The niche here is synthesis. Skill first, ingredient second, ego nowhere. Stories lace the air as surely as smoke does. A winter count gets unrolled in words. The year the river rose and the caches stayed dry because someone taught the children how to listen for the right ground. The season the salmon came thin and nobody panicked. Racks were repaired early, pits lined with clean rock, beans put on the edge of the coals to hum quietly while plans changed. The day a child turned a sheet of blue corn batter with a single clean lift, and then pretended not to notice the way every head lifted at once. This is curriculum disguised as conversation. Safety never stands on a chair to shout. It sits in 100 small habits. A rock with a hidden pocket gets tested at the edge before it goes hot. A ferment is sniffed, and if it says anything in a language you don't speak, it's thanked and retired without argument. Sleeves are close woven. Hair is tied back because fire deserves clarity. Knives face away from the hand that holds. Water is where it can be found at midnight by a sleep-fogged person who won't think to look twice. The best accident story is the one that never gets told. Then comes the moment every cook lives for and can't schedule. The table, real or imagined, plank or blanket quietly declares itself complete. A grain that was sulking loosens. Beans cross that narrow bridge between almost and done. The fish's translucent line along the spine goes opaque and then stops before it goes past. Greens gloss, not wilt. Flatbreads stack under a cloth where they'll stay supple until the last hand finds them. If you ask how everyone knows, they'll point at the pot, at the steam, at the spoon standing just so. But the truth is simpler. The room's heartbeat evens. Serving is choreography with no stars. Bowls move in arcs that avoid elbows and embers. A ladle finds the sweet spot where broth and substance travel together. Someone keeps an eye on the quiet person at the edge and steers a second helping without making it an announcement. The first bites lower shoulders. The second, bring back talk. By the third, the day has organized itself into lessons and jokes. Sweetness arrives last and small. A brush of maple on a wedge of squash that already earned its keep. A curl of nut butter melting into the warm lip of a grain bowl like a good idea arriving on time. A cup that tastes faintly of spruce and smoke and yes, a little of yesterday's story. No symbols, just closure. When the bowl's empty, cleanup begins as if by gravity. Ash clean, soft, unembarrassed by its past life becomes soap, scouring without scolding. Pots soak while the coals still remember how to help. Lids are checked for fibers that might someday be mice. Racks are spaced for the night air. Tools go home to their hooks and ledges in the order morning hands will want them. 2 thumb-thick embers get tucked under a blanket of sifted ash with a breathing hole no wider than a bean. The floor is cleared until there is nothing left to trip over but contentment. What's left in the air isn't smoke so much as a sentence that ends with a period instead of an ellipsis. We cooked with care. We fed who came. We kept the niche intact. Tomorrow can bring its own weather, and we'll answer with the same verbs, the same wrists, the same quiet insistence that physics is an ally and flavor is a straight line. Night will show you how true that is. But that is for the next part, when the coals go from red to memory and the house teaches you how to sleep without letting the fire forget you exist. Evening exhales and the room follows. Coals gather into a slim crescent, a silvered smile on the dark. The last small jobs align themselves without anyone asking. A pot is nudged to its sleeping place at the warm edge. A lid is tipped so the night can breathe and not drip. Tongs close and rest where a sleepy hand will reach with no thinking at all. The fan slides under the ledge like a bookmark that knows tomorrow's first line. Everything has the look of work that knows it will be welcomed back. Night shifts the kitchen from performance to practice. This is the hour when physics feels like friendship. Heat doesn't leap, it leans. Water doesn't shout, it murmurs. A paddle taps a rim, and the hollow ring moves down a half note. Less fuel now. More rest. A reed fan gives 3 small breaths, not one big gust, and the ash settles like snow that decided to behave. The tiny collar of bubbles around a pot's edge says, enough. Someone listens. The flame nods and steps back. Late soups finish their sentences. Bones have given what they came to give. Grains have softened to the exact place where a spoon stands, then lets go like a well-raised guest. Greens glide in, touch heat once, and stay vivid enough to remind the tongue there's still a garden, even after dark. A last thin ribbon of clean fat rounds the bowl so it lands soft in the chest. No flourishes, just care. Teaching happens here too, under the easy authority of lamplight. A young hand learns the difference between moving ash and agitating it, how the first makes calm and the second makes problems. Another learns to find the hot side of a pot by sound, not by guess. A third learns the wrist turn that swaps a cherry-hot stone into a cedar box boil without waking the soup. Corrections are short, wait, now. Listen and praise is lighter still, a half smile that is both diploma and invitation to the next task. Storage keeps watch while the house sleeps. Cash lids wear their disguises. Clay jars sit half buried where the earth remembers cool. Parfleche cases stack with seams so tight the night air gives up. You can feel the math of it with a palm no damp, no give. Racks hang in the good draught under rafters, fish spaced at the width of a patient finger. Ferments get their last sniff. If they speak a language no one in this room understands, they're retired without ceremony. Tomorrow's meals are not a place for wishful thinking. Safety is a choreography of small refusals. No loose sleeves, no baskets where a foot will find them blind. No stones into fire without testing for hidden water at the edge first. Knives are set down so their edges face away from the hand that finds them. Water is kept in the same spot every night, so a person who wakes at the sound of wind can put a hand on the bucket without waking the whole room. The best story about accidents is the one that never gets told. Beyond the walls, weather runs its own kitchen. Wind finds new paths. The smoke learns new manners. A flap is adjusted by the width of a thumb. The line of draft straightens like a sentence that finally found its verb. Rain starts talking to the roof. A screen pivots and decides to listen later. The ember bed narrows until it looks like a necklace laid down by a careful hand. Somewhere in the dark, a coyote reads the air and keeps walking. The room reads the air and sleeps. When the last cups make their rounds, they taste of spruce and mint and a little smoke that isn't a mistake. It's the room signing its name. Sweetness stays small. A curl of maple shaved into hot water, a fingertip of honey for the child who carried wood without being asked. Laughter sits down exactly once more, and then steps aside. Tools lean, floor clears, and the ember you tucked like a bird under ash brightens once as if to say, "I'm here in the morning if you are." The way the house sleeps tells you how it cooks. Quietly. Exactly. With respect for the hour. It keeps a ledger you cannot see but can feel wood carried, water fetched, rules kept, mistakes converted into methods and set on the shelf with names that make people smile. The ledger doesn't close. It rolls forward like a river does, every bend new and somehow already familiar. Traders always nudge that river without turning it into a canal. An iron pot shows up and earns a place next to clay, not over it. Why? Because clay spreads heat like a good rumor, and iron forgives a drop like a good neighbor. A dried pepper arrives in a pouch and proves it can whisper warmth without grabbing the conversation. It stays. A bright seed from far off learns to behave in ash-treated dough and gets invited back. The niche here isn't novelty, it's integration. Skill first, ingredient second, story always. Ceremony walks in now and then wearing its real clothes. A batter gets stirred by one person, while another speaks not because the pot needs the words, but because the people do. A loaf rests until the song reaches a certain line. A first berry is shared under a short phrase about water and luck. Food doesn't become theatre, it becomes witness. Younger hands feel the tone change and adjust their speed. That is how respect is taught without a chalkboard. And because life is larger than feasts, there are also days when the kitchen becomes a command post with better manners. Wildfire smoke on the horizon, fuel small, food portable, water doubled. Stews that accept delays, cakes that travel, a map of caches in heads and on the ground. No panic, just a menu that knows how to make room for weather and worry at the same table. The house has practiced this. That's what all the ordinary days were for. People like to ask, in their modern way, how anyone cooked without switches. The honest answer is that switches were never the main idea. Attention was. The flame is asked, not ordered. The pot is listened to, not bullied. The stone is chosen, not guessed. Flavor is balanced, not shouted. You get good at this the way you get good at anything, by doing it, until your hands know before your mouth can explain. The gadgets are fine. The verbs are better. Evening loops back into morning because kitchens are circles, not lines. Dawn returns like it never left. An ember becoming a glow becoming a flame. The first reed fan whisper announcing a day that will look a lot like the last one and still be nobody's copy. Coals wake under ash. The fan stirs them with a rhythm that feels familiar in the bones. A pot slides an inch. The lid lifts a hair. Steam speaks first because it always does. Breakfast begins not with a menu but with a plan. Seed meal turns into a thin porridge that shines like wet pebbles. A spoon of nut butter melts into it and lowers everyone's shoulders. Dried berries soften into tart, quick punctuation. On the coast, thin fish cakes kiss a hot stone and lift clean when the edges go glossy. Inland, corn porridge sets to the angle that keeps spoons honest. First sips sharpen the weather behind the eyes. No one makes a speech. Everyone eats. Grind, soak, leach, boil, simmer, roast, smoke, dry, store, share the verbs, repeat, because they are the ones that work. A new basket weave drains faster. It's adopted. A better knot opens with cold fingers. It becomes the house standard. A child flips a bread with a single true motion. No one claps, but two elders set a job aside for that child tomorrow. That's curriculum and promotion in the same gesture. Regional voices keep their vowels. Coast remembers lacquered fish and candlefish oil that feeds both lamp and ladle. Desert keeps shade on the ingredient list and turns agave into patient sweetness. Plains lean ribs toward warmth and measure distance with wind. Woodlands carry acorn, gentleness, and hickory perfume. Mountains run lean and precise. Islands braid tide and coconut. Rack and sail. All of them speak the same grammar. All of them improvise a little in the margins, and none of them forget the chorus. Don't waste heat. Don't waste food. Don't waste people. There's humor here, because there has to be. A cake that clung is declared too affectionate, and taught better manners next time. A stew that thickened past its plan gets promoted from soup, and earns a winter appointment. A fish that skittered off the stone and was caught against a knee moves the knee's owner to assistant juggler for the evening. Laughter oils the hinge between perfection and competence. Measuring, in this kitchen, lives in wrists and eyes. You learn that the pot sings higher when it's too hot, lower when it's sulking. You answer with distance, not scolding. You know that water on a stone should skitter and vanish with dignity, otherwise you wait. You can read the coil of steam like handwriting, sharp for boil, rounded for simmer, frayed for trouble. The body becomes the timer, the thermometer, the switch. It turns out the body was ready for the job. And when the question comes, the one people love to ask in long-form stories like this, what lasts? The answer is simpler than you expect. Not the exact recipe, not the exact tool. What lasts is the habit of attention, the reflex to share, the refusal to waste, the confidence that physics is an ally, and the knowledge that the niche of good cooking is made of verbs you can do with your hands. The rest is scenery, the rest is accent. So the day closes again. Dishes stacked in the mind like bowls on a shelf. Coals are levelled. 2 bean-sized embers tucked under ash with a breathing hole small enough to ignore and large enough to matter. Water sits where midnight hands will find it. Knives sleep with edges turned safe. Racks hold their spacing. Cash lids look like ground. The room smells of wood that finished its sentence and a little sweetness that didn't need a headline. Morning will come, smoke will find the opening it has always found, and the line of cooks backward into stories, forward into children, will pick up the same instruments, play the same song, and still find new grace notes. A pot will lift, a spoon will stir, someone will fan instead of flap, someone will turn instead of pry. Someone will listen and count and stop exactly where done begins, and the food will taste like the place, and the people, and the day that earned it no switch required.